Hello guys and girls, welcome to this new video where we unveil the case of Hugo Pinzon. Hugo got lured multiple times by an informant to sell cocaine to law enforcement. In this video we unveil the case in details. This is John McDonnell, a task force officer with Homeland Security Investigations HSI in Chicago. With over 10 years of law enforcement experience, John McDonnell is currently assigned to HSE's Gang and Violent Crimes Task Force, where he plays a crucial role in investigating major criminal violations, particularly in the areas of narcotics trafficking and organized crime. Hugo Pinzon was suspected of violating Title 21 United States Code, Section 84101, which pertains to the possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Specifically, Pinzon is suspected of possessing a mixture or substance containing a detectable amount of cocaine with the intent to distribute it. In or about January 2024, HSI received information from a confidential informant who reported that a person the informant knows as Hugo was selling cocaine in the Chicagoland area. The informant relayed that Hugo's nickname on the street was Juiceman, and that his Facebook name was Spanish Harlem. Based on this information, law enforcement identified Hugo as potentially being Hugo Patino Pinzon. Law enforcement showed the informant a photo of Pinzon obtained from an Illinois Secretary of State driver's license database. The informant positively identified the photo of Pinzon as the person the informant had referred to as Hugo. The informant had previously been observed by law enforcement approximately 4 months ago engaging in potential narcotics violations. When approached by law enforcement, the informant agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. The informant did not have pending charges at the time, but cooperated with the hope that no charges would be filed. Since cooperating, the informant has provided law enforcement with credible information that has been corroborated through recordings, social media, and surveillance. Some of these efforts have led to the successful seizure of controlled substances, cash, and firearms. In exchange for the informant's continued cooperation, law enforcement agreed that no charges would be proposed to prosecuting authorities arising from the informant's prior narcotics violations, as long as the informant provided information that led to one more similar seizure. The informant has a criminal history that includes 9 convictions for assault, 1 for obstructing justice, 8 for traffic violations, 2 for invasion of privacy, 10 for narcotics violations, 1 for flight escape, and 2 for breach of peace disorderly conduct. The informant also has arrests that did not result in convictions. On or about March 5, 2024, the informant tragically died from injuries sustained in a traffic accident. Despite this, the information provided by the informant was pivotal in the investigation of Hugo Pinzon. Additionally, law enforcement determined that Pinzon's driver's license photo was consistent with the public profile photo for the Facebook user with the username Spanish Harlem, the URL for the Spanish Harlem. Facebook profile was https://www.facebook.com/spanish.harlem.14, which confirmed the online identity of Hugo as Pinzon. In mid-January 2024, the informant, under the direction of law enforcement, arranged to purchase cocaine from a suspect named Hugo Pinzon in Chicago. The informant had a FaceTime call with Pinzon, during which Pinzon agreed to sell 4.5 ounces of cocaine for $2,500. This was an unrecorded call, but based on the informant's detailed description, they were able to confirm what was being discussed. Pinzon was going to sell a kilogram-sized amount of cocaine. So now we're entering the critical moment. On January 16, 2024, the informant met with law enforcement at a prearranged location. Before heading out, law enforcement conducted a thorough search of the informant and their vehicle, ensuring they were not carrying any drugs or extra cash. With everything clear, the informant was given $2,500 in marked bills and outfitted with both an audio and video recording device to document the transaction. The informant then drove to the meeting spot in Chicago, where law enforcement was monitoring the area under constant surveillance. When the informant arrived at the meeting spot, law enforcement had set up surveillance to keep eyes on everything. They observed the informant approach Pinzon's vehicle, a dark-colored Nissan SUV, where Hugo was waiting in the driver's seat. The informant got in and, according to their video recording of the transaction, Pinzon handed over a ear plastic bag. Pinzon took the $2,500 in buy funds from the informant and in return handed over the cocaine. After the transaction, the informant closed the passenger side door, and the target vehicle 1 left the scene. Now, at this point, law enforcement continued surveillance while the informant left the meeting location. Once the informant arrived at a predetermined location, they handed over the white powdery substance they had just purchased from Pinzon. The substance was field tested, and it came back positive for cocaine. Just to make sure everything was clean, law enforcement officers conducted a thorough search of the informant, and their vehicle. Nothing additional was found. The informant then confirmed that they had purchased the substance from Hugo, the person they knew and identified as Pinzon. Now here's where things get even more interesting. After the transaction, law enforcement was able to trace target vehicle 1 back to Ian Holdings LLC, a company affiliated with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. It turns out the Nissan had been rented under the name individual from December 21, 2023 to January 18, 2024, just around the time of the drug transaction. So in late January 2024, the informant was once again directed by law enforcement to purchase cocaine from Hugo Pinzon. This time, they arranged the deal over FaceTime, and everything was audio and video recorded for evidence. The informant called Pinzon and during the conversation stated they wanted to buy 4.5 ounces of cocaine, referring to it as a 4 and a splitty. Pinzon immediately agreed to the transaction, saying bet, which, as you can guess, is street slang for okay or I agree. Now, this FaceTime call is crucial. We can actually see Pinzon's face on the screen, which helps law enforcement confirm his identity. So with the deal confirmed, the informant was ready to proceed. On January 25, 2024, the informant met with law enforcement officers at a pre-arranged location. As always, the informant was searched before the transaction to ensure they weren't carrying any illegal substances or extra money, and nothing was found. The informant was then provided with $2,500 in buy funds money that's typically marked for tracking and outfitted with both an audio and video recording device to capture everything that happened next. The informant was driven by an undercover officer to the location of the drug transaction. Law enforcement set up surveillance at the location, ready to monitor the situation from a distance. And sure enough, when the informant arrived at the scene, they exited the undercover vehicle and walked up to a gray Toyota RAV4 with Florida license plates. Now, surveillance officers couldn't see who was in the driver's seat because the windows of the Toyota were heavily tinted. But the informant knew exactly where to go. They opened the front passenger door of the vehicle and prepared to complete the transaction. At this point, law enforcement had visual confirmation that the informant was at the location and engaging in the transaction. But, as always, the real work was happening behind the scenes with the surveillance teams. They were watching, tracking, and making sure everything went according to plan. Remember, this transaction is being recorded from multiple angles. The audio and video capture every detail, from the FaceTime conversation confirming the deal to the actual exchange of the cocaine. It's this type of documentation that gives law enforcement solid evidence for charging someone like Pinzon with drug distribution. On January 25, 2024, the informant met with Hugo Pinzon for another drug transaction in Chicago. After confirming the deal over FaceTime, the informant received 4.5 ounces of cocaine in exchange for $2,500 in buy funds, money that was specifically provided and tracked by law enforcement. Once the transaction was complete, target vehicle 2, the vehicle Pinzon was driving, left the area and parked in the 1500 block of Northwestern Avenue in Chicago. Surveillance teams were already on the move, tracking the car and keeping a close eye on the situation. A field test on the white powdery substance confirmed it was indeed cocaine. This is an important step in confirming the substance purchased during the transaction. But the investigation didn't stop there. On February 1, 2024, law enforcement conducting surveillance on the 1500 block of Northwestern Avenue in Chicago observed Pinzon exiting a residential building at 1537 Northwestern Avenue, also known as the subject residence. Pinzon was seen getting into target vehicle 2, the same car involved in the cocaine transaction. Now, this residential location is becoming significant in the investigation. Law enforcement had already linked target vehicle 2 to Pinzon through vehicle records showing the car had been rented by individual A from Enterprise Rent-A-Car. The vehicle was registered for the period between January 16, 2024 to February 15, 2024, perfectly matching the time frame of the transactions and surveillance. On February 6, 2024, surveillance units again observed Pinzon exiting the same residential building and entering target vehicle 2. These repeated observations helped law enforcement establish a consistent pattern of Pinzon's movements and solidify the connection between him, the vehicle, and the drug trafficking operation. However, just hours later, law enforcement received important information from Enterprise Rent-A-Car. They confirmed that target vehicle 2 had been returned to them that very morning, indicating that Pinzon may have been switching vehicles. Enterprise advised that the person who returned target vehicle 2 was individual A, who had rented the vehicle, and just like that, individual A rented another car, a white 2023 Hyundai Santa Fe, which we'll now refer to as target vehicle 3. On February 7, 2024, law enforcement observed target vehicle 3 parked at the same location on Northwestern Avenue. Shortly thereafter, they saw Pinzon again exit the subject residence and enter target vehicle 3. A short time later, target vehicle 3 returned to the same block and parked on the street. Officers watched as Pinzon exited the vehicle and entered his residence once again, reinforcing the connection between the suspect and this new vehicle. Now that Pinzon was using a new vehicle, law enforcement needed to ensure they could track his every move. On February 8, 2024, Magistrate Judge Maria Valdez of the Northern District of Illinois authorized the installation and monitoring of a GPS tracking device on target vehicle 3. With the GPS tracker now installed, law enforcement could monitor Pinzon's movements in real time, giving them the ability to track him wherever he went. This was a critical move in building a stronger case against Pinzon and ensuring law enforcement could stay one step ahead. Around mid-February, the informant, under the direction of law enforcement, placed a FaceTime video call to Pinzon to arrange a drug deal. According to the call, Pinzon agreed to sell informant 0.25 kilograms of cocaine, which the informant referred to as a quarter key. The agreed price was $4,250. The meeting was set to take place at Bell Avenue north of West Lemoyne Street in Chicago. On February 14, 2024, at 11 a.m. CST, the informant met with law enforcement at a predetermined location for a routine search. They were given the $4,250 in buy funds and outfitted with an audio and video recording device to capture the transaction. The informant was then under constant surveillance as they drove to the meeting location. At around 12:36 p.m. TST, surveillance teams observed Pinzon exiting his residence and entering target vehicle 3. Officers followed Pinzon's movements as he drove down the alley behind the building. The vehicle disappeared from sight, but thanks to the GPS data, law enforcement knew exactly where target vehicle 3 stopped. The GPS tracker confirmed that target vehicle 3 stopped right behind the subject residence. This was key intel. Pinzon was preparing for the meet, and law enforcement was able to track him all the way to the predetermined transaction spot. As the car moved southbound towards the meet location, law enforcement regained visual on target vehicle 3 and continued tracking it. They were able to maintain surveillance on the car all the way to the area where the informant would meet Pinzon for the deal. Once the surveillance team was in position, they observed the informant arriving at the location and walking toward target vehicle 3, where Pinzon was expected to hand over the drugs in exchange for cash. This was another significant step in the investigation, and everything was set for a major bust. Once again, the surveillance team was on high alert. At 12:36 p.m., they saw Pinzon leave the subject residence and enter his new car, target vehicle 3, a white 2023 Hyundai Santa Fe. With the GPS tracker in place, officers were able to track Pinzon as he drove down the alley behind his residence, heading straight for the prearranged meeting point. Once target vehicle 3 arrived at the meeting spot, the informant got out of their vehicle and entered Pinzon's car. The meeting was captured on both audio and video, giving law enforcement irrefutable proof of the exchange. According to the recording,